Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You may know him from such blogs as theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
Doing pretty well, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. We're in the middle of moving, so it's a little challenging, a little bit of a struggle. I'm looking forward to my new recording studio space. Hopefully a little bit further away from the loud things happening in my home. So that would be appreciated. But it's that part of the moving where it's just like boxes and boxes. And
oh yeah, the fun part.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The fun part is let's stress the fun portion of that. Although I've done the flip side where I've been to the person who wants you to help them move and they have nothing boxed up.
Oh God!
And those people belong in hell. Like there's just those are the worst people that exist. People who invite you over to help move.
I've never experienced that. Every time I've helped someone move, it's always. I mean, it's usually. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. It's code for moving heavy stuff, right? Like it's not.
Yeah.
Pack your. Like that's insane.
Nope. I remember being in a situation of that happening and being like, okay, well. Give me a box and just you are going to have everything. Like I'm going out of my way to go to 3 or 4 rooms and just putting things in the box. Like you're just going to have so much more fun. Where did my toothbrushes go? I don't know. They're in the same place as your shoes. I don't I'm just going to hate move you. I liked the comment. Side note: I liked the comment from the episode last week where it was Arif Amerisplains burritos to an Australian. Did you see that? I think it was Kyle Slaby had mentioned something about Arif.
That's great.
Yeah, a complete side note, but I just wanted to mention it. I really enjoyed that Arif Amerisplains burritos.
I totally forgot I did that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I totally did that.
Well, I am explained a breakfast burrito, which, I mean, there's a little bit more, I think, to that.
He could have gone in on different chilies or anything. Nope, we're just going to Amerisplain it. It'll be fine. With that tangent out of the way, welcome to this episode. We have a game to preview this weekend. The Vikings will be hosting the Dolphins. And we have a special guest on for that. We have a little taped interview with Matthew Kanata. He is the host of Phinsider Radio for Phinsider.com. That's Phinsider for, Dolphin. But they are part of the SB Nation network. That's the SB Nation blog for the Miami Dolphins. So you can check that out here in just a couple minutes. Before we get into the show, just want to thank you guys so much for listening and for helping out over the past years. We really do appreciate it. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of 2 different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and you can donate there. That's more of a monthly subscription. Or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well. That's more of a one-time donation that just goes directly to us. This just helps keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, helps keep us ad-free. And all that. So if you enjoy the show, if you hear value in what you are receiving for free, please throw us a couple of bucks. We really would appreciate it. We've got a couple of cool things planned for next year, maybe a little later this year. So just help us out. If you would like to do something else, you can go to you can share the links to the website. You can share the link with a friend. Just do what you got to do. We really do enjoy interacting with you guys and helping out. And the Norse Code Fantasy Leagues are wrapping up now. And I'm looking forward to potentially winning the Norse Code League for you and I. Yes, for us.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to it. You kind of blew us. You kind of blew it in the second league, but not that I was doing much better. I mean, Kareem Hunt goes down, and that was only the 5th bad thing that could have possibly happened to me in the league. So
right.
Oh well. But so we will have a little bit of news on that when it comes to championships. I believe this is the semifinal week. I really do enjoy all the tweets when it comes to the missed extra points because they are happening fast and furious now, and they all mean something. I feel
like there were 14 last week or something like that, and I don't even know how much of an exaggeration that was.
There was an absurd number.
Yeah, it devastated. So the thing is, in a couple of other leagues, I know people love hearing about fantasy stories. I'd only made the playoffs in like a third of them. It was not great. But in the ones I made the playoffs, I had Odell Beckham. So that was cool. That was great. I was very happy with everything, given that he didn't play. And then, of course, in the Norse Code League. Yep.
Well, you start missing extra points, and it'd be easy enough to like look up whether or not there was more missed extra points this year than there has been like the last couple. But it really does appear that they've been happening more in bunches this year than they have before. But anyway, we'll have some news on that here coming up. But before we can talk about any of that, we need to go to our interview with Phinsider Radio for thephinsider.com.
I'm joined by Matthew Kanata and Aaron Sutton at Phinsider Radio. We're going to do something interesting here. We're going to have a conversation that we're going to post to both of our podcasts. So it's going to be a little bit different than what the listeners are used to, which is just me just asking a bunch of questions. It's going to be a bit more back and forth so we can post it to both podcasts. Hopefully everybody learns something pretty cool about it. How are you guys doing?
Good, Arif. How are you?
I'm good.
Awesome, Chief Arif. Thanks for having us.
This is going to be a lot of fun, I think. I think there's like a lot, especially because, they're AFC teams. We don't have, a ton of exposure to the other team. If we're paying attention to the AFC East, it's usually the Patriots. If people are paying attention to the NFC North, very often it's the Packers, which is probably a less interesting conversation than it typically is. Now it's the Bears. But I think people are not really up to things, especially here in Minnesota, about what's happening in Miami. I think people don't have a good sense of, the quality of the team. Is it a good defense? They've got a lot of interceptions. Is it a poor defense? They give up a bunch of yards. Is Ryan Tannehill going to play? Is he up to play? Those sorts of questions. So it should be a pretty good show. I want to kind of get it all started by asking kind of the first question, which is nerdy. It's going to be about the offensive line. I think over the years we've kind of gotten used to the idea that the Miami offensive line has been just really bad, that they haven't invested a lot in it. They, of course, have had multiple controversies surrounding it. But this past year, my sense is that it's not nearly in the place that it has been in the past, that the offensive line has improved. Am I wrong about that? Is that kind of like a mistake, or have they genuinely improved, and if so, how?
Yeah, no, the offensive line for the Dolphins right now is a complete mess. It's a complete disaster.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, in the offseason, they had worked to strengthen it, and it paired by the moves they made on paper, they did strengthen it, but very early injuries to Daniel Kilgore, the center they got from San Francisco after moving on from Mike Pouncey, and then Josh Sitton as well, who they got. He was a great pass protector. Kilgore was kind of a poor man's Mike Pouncey, I like to say. Different strengths, different weaknesses. And then they had Jesse Davis and Juwan James and Laremy Tunsil. So their bookends are fantastic. And one thing you need to watch with the Dolphins' offensive line on Sunday when the Vikings and Dolphins face off is Juwan James. And they've been using him to pull a lot more. And you'll see him pulling off to the left side of the line of scrimmage. He did that quite often in the Patriots game and actually contributed to a lot of big runs from Frank Gore and Kenyon Drake. So be aware of that. And Laremy Tunsil has improved greatly from his rookie season where he played guard, then shifted to left tackle last year. Struggled a bit, but has really upped his play. So the bookends are solid. You got Ted Larson there. I know his name's been being floated around this week with the Miracle in Miami, but really he struggles quite a bit on the offensive line. And Travis Swanson, he's just another guy. He's not terrible. He's not great. Injuries have hurt the position a lot. But the Vikings with the pass rush they have at times and so forth. It's going to be interesting to see how much pressure they can get on the Dolphins.
And I think this particular game sets up better for the for passing than it does rushing in terms of Dolphins offense. We were pretty productive in the last game against the Patriots, but when you kind of rewind the tape a little bit further behind that, you don't see a consistently productive running game. And I think we're going to have to come out and pass. But that's kind of a difficult proposition because Minnesota has one of the better secondaries in the NFL. So, Arif, I'll throw this to you. I'm the Dolphins. I want to attack your linebackers. How am I going to do that?
Yeah, so if you wanted to throw against the linebackers, this would be a pretty good year for it because the Vikings linebackers are typically good in coverage, and this year they've kind of fallen off. Unless Eric Wilson sees a lot of the field, he's been a really excellent linebacker in coverage, like really phenomenally excellent, like kind of unbelievable. But, he's such a liability against the run that they don't want to put him out there. Plus, Eric Kendricks, Anthony Barr, those are your starters. You're not really going to move on from them. So Eric Kendricks has had a lot of trouble this year in coverage. He gave up 97 yards to James White, and just in coverage. I think James White ended up with a lot more receiving yards total. And Anthony Barr has improved pretty substantially in coverage, and he's actually been, from snap to snap, pretty good. But, you'll always find kind of just a big play, especially earlier in the year, a big play where he's kind of given up, a big reception. But he's been actually better than Kendricks. It's very unusual given kind of Kendricks' reputation as a really high-level coverage linebacker. They have been giving Kendricks the running backs in coverage, and very often that's the more difficult of the two matchups that they end up putting on the linebackers. So very often I would expect, when the Vikings are in man coverage, for Kenyon Drake to do a fair bit of damage. If he's healthy enough to play, I think that's a concern, if I remember correctly. But, if he is healthy enough to play, I think that Drake will do a lot probably to exploit the linebackers in coverage. And then, kind of in zone, it just feels like Kendricks doesn't have a feel for the way zones have been developing. And so very often when, you put a defender in a conflict in zone, that Kendricks kind of reads it the wrong way or floats in the wrong direction and creates a lot of space. So, routes to the inside that really put a lot of pressure on Kendricks specifically in his zone. I think that's something that would probably end up with a lot of success, regardless of whether it's a receiver, tight end, or a running back. With that in mind, how capable are the Dolphins of potentially achieving that? I know that, for example, in the fourth round, they drafted Kalen Ballage, who to me was a premier pass-catching running back, kind of despite his size profile and all that. But I haven't heard his name a lot. Obviously, I've seen a lot of Drake. What do you see as potentially the Dolphins' strengths with regards to that matchup?
Yeah, Ballage has gotten a lot more run recently, but he's still not crazy involved in the offense, more of a wildcat type guy, change of pace kind of guy. I thought it was interesting with the Dolphins when they played the Patriots this past Sunday. Brandon Bolden has been getting more and more work, and he's actually scored 2 touchdowns, a long touchdown as well, against the Patriots. So I'm curious to see if they're going to keep mixing him in. Starting with the Bengals game, I think it was week 3 or week 4, the Dolphins took Kenyon Drake out of the number 1 running back position and put Frank Gore in. And they're using him to mainly stay on schedule there. And what that means, as you know, Arif, but for those listening, is to keep the yards moving in the positive direction, to shorten the distance on second down and ultimately shorten it on third down if they even get to the third down spot, but to make those second and third downs much more manageable. And while Frank Gore has broken a few big runs, he's not going to take it to the house, but he just, he sees that hole and he hits it right away. Kenyon Drake, and Adam Gase has said this too, is that he likes to hit the home run. And when you try to hit the home run, sometimes you're going to get a loss of yards on the play, and that's what he's concerned about. So they've been mainly using Kenyon Drake as a pass-catching receiver out of the backfield, where Frank Gore is running with the ball straight ahead and rumbling through the guys. So when you talk about, your Vikings linebackers and their struggles, you're right. I think Kenyon Drake, and you're right with the shoulder injury, but he does seem to be improving. He should be ready to go on Sunday. If the Dolphins are able to get him into space, I think he can do great things on Sunday. Kalen Ballage, like you mentioned, again, doing some big things there. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he hasn't had too many opportunities. But, if he gets his chance, if anything were to happen to Gore or Drake, or if Drake can't continue because the shoulder becomes too much of an issue, I do think Ballage can make some run there. And then, of course, again, you have Bolden, Sutton. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else but the Dolphins running backs out of the backfield.
Well, I really appreciate getting into the X's and O's. I'm mostly a nerd in that regard, but I want to kind of address the elephant in the room, Arif. So you guys just fired your offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Do you think this is that type of game for Minnesota where it's like a rallying point where, both Minnesota and Miami have no room for error? I mean, absolutely no room for error where we are standing in the playoff picture. So do you see John DeFilippo, his firing, do you see that as a catharsis, so to speak, or do you see this as kind of a highway to hell, so to speak?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I honestly, I mean, I don't think there's any way to know. So my feelings are kind of what's guiding me here. So I didn't actually agree with the decision. I'm not going to say that he called a great game against Seattle or anything like that, or that the offense hasn't been underperforming in pretty significant ways relative to its talent. Both of those things are true. But I just think that with coordinators, very often it might even take a year. And I think the best example of that is Kyle Shanahan. 2015, that offense was not performing up to its talent level. 2016, you had an MVP at quarterback. Which I'm not saying that was the likelihood either, but I do think that his approach to run the ball less was actually appropriate given the Vikings' strengths and weaknesses, and given kind of what's been working in the NFL. But you also have to be able to play nice with others, and it sounds like based off of and you have to read between the lines because no one's saying this out loud, but based off of what we're seeing and hearing. Is that there might have been a little bit less communication between the quarterback and the offensive coordinator than you wanted. Obviously, DeFilippo wasn't running the ball as much as Mike Zimmer wanted, which is something that he's been saying for a couple of weeks. And so when you can't find a way to communicate with your head coach about what you think the appropriate game plan should be, or you're not listening to your boss about what you should be doing, even if you think, maybe that's not the right approach, that makes you probably not a great offensive coordinator. Because even if you're right about a lot of the decisions that you make where you disagree with the head coach about something, I think that the impact that it has on the team when you kind of disagree and it ends up becoming very public ends up hurting you more than any sort of theoretical expected points gained from passing the ball more often or something like that. So with that in mind, I think Stefanski's, he's really well liked. He's the longest tenured Vikings coach who survived since the Brad Childress era way back. And so he's really well liked, and I think that they're probably going to be approaching the offense in a different way that is going to, I think, lead to more points in at least the short term.
Arif, would it be likely that Minnesota approaches this game with a run-first attitude? I mean, it seems like a statement sort of game. You make that change, and then you want to go out and you want to kind of enact the culture that you thought you should have seen. Culture is probably not the right word, more like scheme. You want to enact the scheme that you thought was going to be successful, and I'm sure Mike Zimmer in some ways just want to kind of control the game flow, and that was what he's used to in terms of a winning product. So do you see Minnesota coming out and being a little bit more run-oriented, and do you think Miami has the gusto to stick up to that in Minnesota in the freezing cold?
Luckily the game's indoors, so the issue with the cold is just going to be a residual problem traveling. That I think is a really interesting question, especially because Miami has really interesting run defense numbers that I want to run by with you in a second. But the first is I think that they will be running the ball a lot more because, when the guy ahead of you gets fired because he's not running the ball and you get promoted, I think you run the ball. You think
you better run the ball.
Yeah, right. Message received. But I don't know how effective it's going to be. I mean, they're just not a very effective run blocking unit, and I think that's a talent problem in a lot of ways. I don't think it's a schematic problem. The Vikings were very good last year at zone running, and it's a zone running scheme. It was the same kind of offensive line system, and they tend to be implemented by offensive line coaches more than offensive coordinators. Obviously, the passing of Tony Sperano, before the season started, has really impacted a lot of things, but I don't think having a new offensive coordinator is going to kind of reset where that offensive line was in terms of their ability to block. So I don't think they're going to be making schematic changes. There's not time to make schematic changes. And so they're going to have to find a way to run the ball given the plays that are already in their playbook and the techniques they've already taught to their offensive linemen. So they're going to run the ball more. I don't know how much more effective it's going to be. They're the least successful running unit in the league. They rank last in expected points per run. Obviously they rank last in rushing yards and stuff like that because they don't run the ball much either. And so that's going to be interesting. What's curious about that, of course, is that Dalvin Cook is a really, really high-level running back. He ranks third or fourth in PFF's elusive rating, which combines, missed tackles per rush and yards after contact and stuff like that into kind of one statistic about how you can force missed tackles. And very typically it's receiving backs like Kenyon Drake or Austin Eckler that rank really high in the statistic. And so when you get kind of a primary back that runs the ball a lot more, ranking high in that statistic, I think that's really meaningful. So they may find ways around it, maybe run some more trap or wham plays, but it really does, I think, depend on the state of the Dolphins' defense. And so the question I have here is, I think the Dolphins are 4th in rushing yards allowed. They allow 4.8 yards a carry. But, and those are not great measures of running back success or rushing defense or offense. And another measure that I just mentioned that might be better about it is expected points per rush. And they rank in the middle of that. And so, you could say, hey, the rushing defense is bad. They give up all these yards. They give up all these yards per attempt. But you take a look at the context in which these runs occur, and it's about league average. What's the split here? What's closer to representing the actual Miami run defense, and what's what's there to worry about from a Miami perspective when the Vikings run the ball?
I'm glad you said within the context, Arif, because I was going to start off with that. The Dolphins, they've given up a lot of chunk plays. From when you look at play to play to play, you're right. They're right within the league average of what they're doing with their run defense, and they're stuffing the run. They're opposing running backs are getting a few yards per rush, but then sometimes there will be a breakdown in coverage, and the running back will break open for a long touchdown or a long run. And the other thing that the Dolphins really struggle with, and I know Kirk Cousins isn't the most mobile quarterback, but he does have some legs on him, is they've really struggled with scrambling quarterbacks this season. Josh Allen absolutely destroyed them 2 weeks ago with the Buffalo Bills. Andrew Luck even scrambled to beat Aaron Rodgers when they played the Packers. Deshaun Watson went crazy all over them. They really struggle. If the quarterback can get out of the pocket, then the Dolphins are going to have a tough time. That being said, I don't know how much Kirk is going to run. You mentioned Dalvin with his stats there and averaging 4.2 yards per carry this season, only 367 yards on the season, 87 rushes, had those injuries earlier in the year to start off, and then lingered a bit. Last year, he tore his ACL halfway through the season, or just about. At that point, he was averaging, around the same. His career average is 4.5 yards per carry. And you're right, with the back and forth between DeFilippo and Zimmer basically publicly saying we need to run the ball more, then covering and saying, no, they don't have any issues, they communicate well, and so forth. We know the Vikings are probably going to try to establish the run on Sunday. Now, what's interesting is this. The Dolphins bottled up the Patriots running backs. They only allowed 77 rushing yards on Sunday. Earlier in this season, they allowed 175 rushing yards to the Patriots. And what I noticed the Dolphins did differently throughout the game is they put 5 men on the defensive line and went with 2 linebackers. So I'm curious to see if that's going to be a trend moving forward, or if that was just something to throw off the Patriots because of what they've been showing on tape and wanted to give a different look. I suspect they may try to use it more because it worked so effectively against the Patriots. Now, the downside to that is, yes, you have Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. I'm not really too concerned about Kyle Rudolph there. He's been slowing down this year and has struggled to be consistent. But you also have Laquan Treadwell as well, who can break open in the field. So I'm worried about that respect that the Dolphins try to shut down the run. But I will say it's basically hit or miss. If Dalvin can break a long run, if he can get in the open field, then the rushing game can be successful in terms of stats and yards and moving the ball. But in terms of from play to play to play to play, the Dolphins are pretty much right there and won't give up too much unless they get that chunk play out there.
I think first down run defense is going to be really important for the Dolphins. For the Dolphins defense on Sunday. Wow, I just had like 3 different tongue twisters right in a row. But so it's going to be really important that we do better on first down. And one of the issues that we saw throughout the tape that's starting to get cleaned up a little bit were some gap integrity issues. And I think that was a coaching and schematic thing. I don't think it's a lack of talent of what we have in the linebacker unit. So I think we're seeing a little bit better coverage in terms of being sound with our assignments, and through that and through sound tackling, we're getting some better results in the run defense. But the unfortunate aspect of that is that it's been inconsistent, and it's been inconsistent throughout the season. So it's kind of hard to say how physical we're going to come out on Sunday.
Yeah, all right. Let's talk about some of the individual players I think involved in the Dolphins' run defense, because I think that's kind of an interesting conversation too. I think Cameron Wake is playing something like 55% of snaps, but when he's on the field, he's still playing at a really high level, and he's going to be going up against Brian O'Neill, who looks like he's cleared to play. There were some concerns because he had to leave the game last week, but may end up having struggles as kind of just a rookie right tackle up against a veteran defensive end. But Cameron Wake's not playing 90% of snaps or 80% of snaps or anything like that. And I'm wondering if he's being used as a third down guy because he has a ton of pressures on for the year despite not having a ton of sacks. And kind of what's happening when he's off the field. Are they primarily kind of a run defense? Sort of sad are they having a run-heavy defensive lineman play there? How's Robert Quinn doing? Devon Godchaux is somebody that I didn't really like coming out of the draft, but it seems like he's playing a little bit better than I expected. Despite that, you've got these kind of weird numbers for Miami's run defense. Kind of what members of the defensive line are kind of responsible for, good or bad, the state of the Miami run defense?
Matthew, you want me to take this?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Devon Godchaux, I would agree, Arif. When Houts and I looked at his tape, it seemed really dependent on how he timed the snap. I mean, each and every snap, it was either he was on it and he was wreaking havoc, or he was the last one to the party in not a cool way. So the fact that he has been able to turn it on as a professional has been a pretty welcome sight for us, a fifth-round investment there. We've had, unfortunately, a couple of injuries along that group. And William Hayes, we lost him early, and he was a tone setter for us. And that was a big loss for us. But then you have, Robert Quinn, you asked about him. I would say, he's up in the air whether we bring him back, because he's one of those players that is showing a little bit of production, but does it justify the contract that he would make next year? And it's one of those contracts where we could save a lot of money and there's no dead money involved. So that's kind of a sidebar issue with Robert Quinn going forward, but pretty average play, I would say.
If I could just jump in about Quinn real quick, Sutton. If you look at his run stop percentage, it's probably right in the middle of the league in terms of the edge guys, but his run stop percentage is 7.5%. And when you look at that, the guy with the you look at Calais Campbell, who's played the most snaps at the top there, his run stop percentage is 13.9%. So it's not a huge difference, but Robert Quinn, like Cam Wake, is more of an edge rusher, more of a pass rusher. But when you look at Quinn versus Wake in terms of setting the edge and stopping the run, Quinn is the better player there. But I wouldn't say he's dynamite all-star player stopping the run.
Exactly. And we're a group that likes to rotate, so it ends up that offensive play callers can kind of pick on some of the weak links in this group. And some of the weak links, Andre Branch, when he's in, doesn't bring that much to the table. Charles Harris, Dolphins fans are starting to enter the territory, whether he's a bust or not. Most would probably say that he is at this point. And then you have some backups who wouldn't ordinarily be getting as many snaps as you would like, but that's the situation of the National Football League with injuries. So we're playing guys like Ziggy Hood and Akeem Spence. Now, Akeem Spence likely would have been our number 3 defensive tackle, but is getting number 2 defensive tackle snaps, and sometimes that rears its ugly head. So it can come in different ways. One of the frustrating things from my standpoint was, we came in running the wide 9 defensive scheme, so it's vaunted supposedly for not being able to allow runs to get outside. It's better at setting the edge, but we still have not been that successful at even setting the edge, even with the wide 9. So to me, it really just depends on how physical everybody comes out and plays on Sunday. We've seen it differently at home and on the road. We tend to be a little bit more smash mouth at home, a little bit more communication issues, a little bit more tentative on the road, and just that subtle difference can magnify itself kind of over time during these games.
And Arif, just a quick note, since Sutton opened the door to the Dolphins' poor play on the road, the Vikings 5-3 at US Bank Stadium in 2016, 7-1 in 2017, 4-2 this year. How big of a home field advantage now in the Dome? Obviously in the Dome before as well, but a more efficient field, a more acoustical advantage for the Vikings in their home stadium. How much is that going to make a difference, and how much has it made a difference since that stadium opened?
Yeah, no, it feels like the Vikings do have a really significant home field advantage, and that might just be because the putrid performances we've seen when they have been bad have been on the road. So, it might be a little bit of one or the other. But, I don't really know kind of what specific qualities have led to their kind of home-away split. A lot of it might have to just do with the fact that, within a controlled environment, you don't have to deal with kind of the weather patterns screwing up with your passing game and stuff like that. But some of them might be just the particular areas of every field. And if you're used to the kind of field that you have, you're going to perform better on it, especially when you've got something like a turf grass kind of split. You just kind of know what kind of movements will get you where and with how much energy. And so that, I think, kind of plays a big role. Obviously, the acoustic environment is really important. And when they were in a temporary home at TCF Bank Stadium before they moved to US Bank Stadium, you didn't really have that acoustic advantage. They had fewer fans in the stands. Obviously, it's open air, and so that plays a big role. And I think that has kind of allowed them to generate some advantages on defense. There have been some timeouts that have been called as a result of the combination of Zimmer's defense throwing a confusing look and the fans being loud enough to prevent adjustments and stuff like that. All of those might play a role. It's always difficult to tell kind of what specific thing it is, but it's very clear that the Vikings do have one. And there's some research that indicates that newer stadiums tend to have bigger home field advantages, and that advantage diminishes over time. So that might be part of it too. It's just other teams are just not used to that environment at all. That all I think plays a role. Kind of switching tacks a little bit, we talked a little bit about the defensive linemen. I do want to ask about the secondary because I think it's one of the more intriguing secondaries. I don't want to say it's like the best or the worst or anything like that. It's really fascinating, right? Because they've got Micah Fitzpatrick. Xavier Howard is playing. Some games he's playing like out of his mind, like he's one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. And some games feels like he's getting burned. Rashad Jones might be the most underrated safety in the league. He's really fun to watch. The secondary overall, it just feels kind of fascinating. Can I get like kind of a rundown on what roles, especially players like Micah Fitzpatrick, what roles everyone's playing, and kind of how that manifests in the Dolphins' defensive scheme?
So we're playing Mink at boundary corner. I don't think anybody was expecting that coming into this season.
No. Yeah.
So we were kind of looking at him in a Swiss Army knife role, and thank God he's embraced that boundary role because, we had Cordrea Tankersley that we were high on coming into the season, who, for whatever reason, has fallen off the face of the earth, had some injuries on that side. Xavier Howard likely, from what I've seen, is not going to play this Sunday, and in my opinion, should probably just shut him down for the season, in my opinion, simply because he's one of those players that we might be looking at investing in relatively soon. So you have to look at the long-term investment aspect of that. So what you saw last week without Xavier Howard is you saw Minka shadow Josh Gordon last week. And I'm curious if they would take that same approach. So I don't know if they would have Minka shadow Adam Thielen and then hope that Bobby, a combination of Bobby McCain and Torrey McTyer can limit Stephon Diggs enough. But I will admit that I think the Dolphins are catching a lucky break in the sense that the Vikings might be predisposed to going with that rushing attack and not taking the clear advantage, in my opinion, that the Vikings wide receivers have over the secondary. So this might be kind of a situational lucky thing for the Dolphins in that sense. So I do think that there are some weaknesses that can be exploited in this Dolphins secondary. Tom Brady likely could have put up even more stats than what he did last week. So it was just a bend not break sort of thing last week, and we broke a ton also. So it definitely makes me nervous with this kind of stew of the Vikings being a little pissed off, just fired their offensive coordinator, want to make a statement, have some talent advantages in the secondary. So I just hope that you guys are so focused on establishing the run that you forget about the advantages that you have on the boundary.
Yeah, it'll be pretty interesting to see who shadows who and whatnot, because you end up seeing there was a strong shadow on Adam Thielen by Jaire Alexander in Week 12. There was kind of a strong shadow by Patrick Peterson and Stephon Gilmore on Stephon Diggs. And so different teams have decided to shadow different players. And I think Jason McCourty, for example, shadowed Adam Thielen, Nevin Lawson, but that was because they kind of played sides. It was kind of a weird game with the Detroit Lions. But different teams have chosen to shadow a different receiver, and I think a lot of it might have to do with the fact that Adam Thielen is much more likely to go in the slot. I think 60% of his snaps have been in the slot, and so if you shadow him, you have to be prepared to let your cornerback play in the slot, which is like kind of just a whole different position, especially in the modern NFL. So I don't know what that ends up looking like for the Dolphins. Sometimes they've decided to shadow one player. This is what the Patriots did. They shadowed Adam Thielen, and then they put just a double team on Diggs, in a very literal sense. Like they had two players at the line of scrimmage, and they just followed him, not just like a bracket. And then actually the Seahawks did the same thing. It was like the most bizarre thing, because the only other time I've ever seen it in the NFL was with Calvin Johnson, where they just literally just put two. Well, I've seen it with Randy Moss too, but in the recent NFL, where they just put two cornerbacks or two defenders as if they were like jammers on a punt, right? And they just follow. Like one has outside leverage, one has inside leverage. It's bizarre. It must be really interesting to try and coach that. But it happened in the last two games where both receivers were doubled in the Seahawks game. Stephon Diggs was doubled again in a literal sense in both games, but especially in the Patriots game. And in one snap, because of the way the safety rolled down, Stephon Diggs was triple teamed. It's bizarre kind of what happens. And so the strategy of shadowing one and doubling the other has come up. I think it happened kind of in the Cardinals game, although that was kind of a more traditional double team where you've got a bracket up top. If I'm the Dolphins, yeah, I mean, obviously the ideal approach is for the Vikings to constantly seek to establish the run. But I think that they should try and throw a variety of coverages out there, just because I think shadowing one and doubling the other, whatever, it's going to create kind of an expectation, and it's going to create very similar looks over the course of the game. And if you mix things up, it's going to make it very difficult for Kirk Cousins, who relies a lot on his pre-snap read, to try and figure out who he has to go to. So that, I think, I don't know, that's going to be interesting to find out, just because of how things have kind of progressed over the season, and that the Vikings have been getting less and less good, as it were, at exploiting their other options when it comes to receiving. I mean, we've seen Aldrick Robinson run up the seam, for example, against a linebacker, and Cousins checks down to Dalvin Cook. And so that ends up being kind of a fascinating and important conversation for the Vikings, kind of how they adapt to that and what the Dolphins do. I think conversely, I think there's some really good questions to ask about the Dolphins receiving core. Obviously, Kenny Stills is an interesting deep threat who can do a lot. Devontae Parker has been, I don't know, it feels like his career is revived and then dropped off, and then revived and then dropped off. And I still remember a couple of years ago the
story of his life.
Right, yeah. I remember the Roto-World, well, I guess Roto-World just reported it, but this is where I read it, that he was watching his college tape a couple of years ago to remind himself that he was still good.
Yeah.
Okay, that was him. Okay.
Strange, right?
Yeah, no, that's, okay, so it's easy to make fun of, but I mean, whatever works, honestly.
Right.
Lanta Carew is somebody that I really, really liked a lot coming out of the draft. Sounds like he hasn't done much. What do you feel is the state of the Dolphins receiver core? And obviously I missed Danny Amendola, but what do you feel is the state of the Dolphins receiving core? How do you feel that they match up against, maybe Xavier Rhodes is underperforming a little bit this year, but, you still have Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, who's been playing pretty well, Harrison Smith, and Anthony Harris, who's been playing really well as, Kenzie Alexander, who over the past couple of weeks has really gone on and improved in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, the Dolphins receiving core, it's obviously different with Ryan Tannehill and Brock Osweiler, way different. Kenny Stills has, not had a huge season in terms of stats, but you also have to look at Brock Osweiler never looked his way at all, really, when he was in as quarterback. So with Ryan Tannehill in there, him and Kenny have a great connection. I know the Dolphins have been purposely trying to script plays Kenny's way to get him more involved. And Kenny, I think I saw a stat earlier today, he has first most or second most long touchdown receptions throughout his career over the past several years. When you look at his, next-gen stats, his cushion that he gets between himself and the defenders is 5.9 yards. The person who has the best is Deshaun Jackson at 7.3 yards. But, when you look at Kenny, that's probably the top 30 in the league or so, and Stephon Diggs is right near him as well. Kenny gets good separation between him and the defenders as well there, getting in at 2.5-yard separation when the top guy is right above him there just about a yard more, and the bottom guy is down at 1.7, Kelvin Benjamin towards the bottom of the league there. So Kenny, the long ball, that's his forte. He's going to, run some slants and try to make some things happen in the space there. Devontae Parker up and down. We all saw him on primetime there. He had a huge game against the Texans. We do think the Dolphins were trying to showcase him there for a potential trade, and then he got hurt, I believe, in practice later that week before the trade deadline. Yeah, so what a surprise there. But he's been up and down. He's not a reliable receiver. You got Danny Amendola. He's the slot guy. He's a poor man's Jarvis Landry. Obviously not as good as Jarvis Landry, but he's the guy that filled his role. Earlier in the season, the Dolphins had Albert Wilson, who was a playmaker, who made a lot of things happen with his speed. What was that?
The Yak King, Albert Wilson, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Between him and Golden Tate. Golden Tate's not doing much in Philly now either. But, the Dolphins receiving core, you're right. Leonte Cruz, the Dolphins loved him. A lot of people loved him. Dolphins gave up a lot of draft picks to go get him, and he has not done a lot of great things in Miami. And Mike Gesicki, when you look at the other pass catchers on a team, he's done basically nothing as well. That's the rookie tight end there. So, but the Dolphins still find ways to make things happen. And, that's the crazy part. When you look at their record, and they're still right in the thick of the playoff race, and, they get chunk plays. It's not like they're going to sit there and drive down the entire field on you. They're most likely not going to do that. They're going to get the big plays, the chunk plays, and that's what really kind of keeps them in games and helps them win games, as we've seen in multiple games this season. Ryan Tannehill has improved. I think he's thrown 8 touchdown passes since he's returned. That's the best in the league, and his quarterback rating since coming back from his injury is one of the best in the league as well. So he has improved since coming back from the injury. He is more efficient. He is locking onto his receivers more, getting them the ball quickly, letting them make plays in space. In terms of scaring a defensive secondary like the Vikings, I don't think the Vikings should be too concerned about that.
All right.
Yeah, I don't think this is a game that Tannehill comes out and throws it 42 times and we find success. I think we have to find some kind of balance somehow. I think with some of the injuries, just where it hurts us is not being able to push the ball down the field as much as we'd like. So it just brings defenders up, and it ends up stifling the run game, as a kind of a indirect sort of thing. So unfortunately, we'd like to be able to move the ball vertically a little bit better. We were able to do that against the Patriots a little bit better, and Tannehill certainly pushes the ball down the field vertically much more than Osweiler does. But we still, are relying on dink and dunk stuff. And when that stuff isn't working, it can really interrupt the game flow for us offensively.
All right, that all makes sense, unfortunately for the Dolphins. So my next question is then about this tight end unit, because, you mentioned the rookie Mike Gesicki. Obviously, he had this incredible combine that everyone's paying attention to, and he hasn't materialized a ton as a pass catcher coming out. People thought him as kind of a pass catcher only, and that's fine. Obviously, there's a bunch of tight ends that have been pretty valuable. I think Zach Ertz is a really good example of one that have been pass-catching tight ends kind of only. But you mentioned a lot that, you mentioned that the right tackle Juwan James likes to pull a lot, and that very often means you've got a tight end down blocking next to him. Not always, but very often. And if that's the case, I want to know kind of how good has Nick O'Leary been as a run-blocking tight end? Durham Smythe I think that's another rookie. Durham Smythe coming out of Notre Dame, really great blocking tight end. I thought at the Senior Bowl he looked like a better receiver than I thought, but I'm not sure he's getting necessarily a ton of snaps, but I do kind of want to know what the state of the run blocking looks like on the outside when you've got tight ends doing some dirty work.
It's a little bit better than we expected, to be honest with you, and Nick O'Leary has been a really nice find by this organization mid-season by a division rival. He was with Buffalo, so to scoop him up, you kind of get that insider knowledge, so to speak. And he's really come out, and one of his first games, he came out and just killed it. Now, he's obviously tamed off a little bit since then. We're getting some average tight end play, but for someone that you pick up mid-season to be ranked in the top 25 by PFF, I think that's a win for us, and I think he's done nicely in both respects. He has sure hands, and he's been legitimate in the run blocking position. Mike Gesicki, we're a little bit conflicted about him in Dolphins land. You mentioned the outstanding measurables from the combine. You see it translate a little bit, but you also see the baby giraffe sort of steps that he's trying to take. I want to kind of encourage my own patience by saying that tight ends probably have one of the steeper learning curves of any college player coming into the NFL, but we certainly, I think, expected a few more jump ball scenarios in the end zone and just kind of have a few highlight plays to chew on going into a sophomore season. So we really haven't seen that much from Mike Gesicki. Durham Smythe, has just a hair over 100 snaps, so haven't seen much out of him. He's been pretty decent in a pass blocking sense, so that we usually bring him in, in a 12 personnel grouping and keep him in to block and kind of rotate the line. AJ Derby was another guy that we had who's someone that's on IR, who was probably one of our best performing tight end, to be honest with you, not named Nick O'Leary. So not having him has decreased the versatility a little bit, but the tight ends simply are not a featured route in the Miami Dolphin offense right now. I'd be surprised if they're more than a third read at this point, red zone notwithstanding. So I don't think, unfortunately, I was asking you earlier about how to attack these linebackers because I really want these tight ends to be able to take advantage of those matchups. I'm just not sure that we're going to be able to do it.
All right. Important question. We're recording this interview after James and I recorded the mailbag, and so for listeners, this will be a preview of one of the questions in the mailbag, but I already answered that there. But I do want your answer to this question. Is Frank Gore a Hall of Famer?
First ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt.
First ballot.
No doubt. The dude is 35 years old right now. Doesn't run like he's 35 years old. I think he's number 4 on the all-time yards of scrimmage list. If he plays another season, probably going to get to number 3, but that's probably as far as he's going to get. This dude is a freak. I was in the locker room several weeks ago when the Dolphins played the Raiders earlier in the season, and Frank Gore walked right past me. The dude is a damn tank. He is massive. He is built, and he's just been so consistent throughout his NFL career. And to have the storied career that he's had, yeah, I absolutely think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Do you think it's important to that someone in the Hall of Fame? So the test I used when I talked about this again in the future was that I think that you need to be one of the 2 or 3 best players at your position, unless it's a decadal position like quarterback where someone's just going to be at the top for a decade and a half. Do you think Frank Gore has ever been one of the best 2 or 3 running backs? And do you think that's really important for a Hall of Fame discussion? Because obviously we've got players like Jerome Bettis in the Hall of Fame too.
That's an interesting question, because when you put it like that, I don't think Frank Gore has been at the discussion when you look at the NFL running backs of the top running back, right? You've had guys like LaDainian Tomlinson. You guys had like Jamal Charles up there and others who have had their runs at the top for a few years. But Frank Gore has never really been in that discussion. I'm not sure if because he's not a flashy type running back where he just grinds it out and gets the yards that he needs, or if he truly really wasn't. He's just an underrated player, in my opinion. I don't think he gets the attention he deserves because he doesn't crave the attention that other running backs get. And while some running backs don't crave the attention, you look at a guy like Todd Gurley, it's not like he's out there campaigning for himself all the time, but he's the explosive type player where people are going to notice. Frank Gore is not that. He's just a grinded out player. For me, I look at Hall of Fame guys and I say, can you tell the history of the game without this player? And if you could tell the history of the game without this player, then they probably don't belong in the Hall of Fame. If you need that player to tell the history of the game that in their current era or their era in which they played, then they do belong in the Hall of Fame. When you look at Frank Gore, based on the amount of yards from scrimmage he's gotten, based on everything he's done throughout his career, I think when you look at his era of football, then I think you do need to tell the history of the game with him in there, which is why I think he's a Hall of Famer.
And I would kind of compare him to Cal Ripken Jr. in baseball, like somebody that's not jacking 500-foot home runs and stealing tons of bases and making a bunch of huge highlight plays, but somebody that played the game really freaking well for a really long time. And I think in the game of football, the commodity is availability, and the fact that Frank Gore's been playing for so long at one of the most devalued positions in the NFL to just go out and grind it out year after year and put up production each and every year. I think that's a testament to itself. I won't say that he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I think he gets in.
Okay, so final question about this topic then, or I guess half question, two questions. So one is, so the first argument that you made about that kind of consistency, not seeking out attention, but like quietly performing without anyone noticing, that sounds like also a case for Steven Jackson to be in the Hall of Fame. Former Rams and then I think briefly Falcons running back. Do you think that makes sense, or is Gore just been better for longer than Steven Jackson, so they're not comparable?
I don't think they're comparable.
Okay.
Steven Jackson was a grinded out guy, but you don't really think of Steven Jackson when you think of the better running backs in those eras.
Okay, and then second question, you can't tell the story of the NFL or the history of the NFL without that player. That test sounds like a case for Michael Vick to be in the Hall of Fame, despite him not playing very often and honestly on the aggregate not playing as well as I think a lot of people remember. So would you put Michael Vick in the Hall of Fame based on that second test?
You're getting me here, Arif.
Hey, this is important.
You're right. He is important, right? He's played what? He played from 2001 to 2015, obviously, towards the end of his career. Obviously not what he once was. Oh, if he did not miss 2007, 2008, I think he'd be a surefire Hall of Famer because at that point, he was on fire. He had 2,474 yards in 2006, 2,412 passing yards in 2005, 2,313 the year before. Then he missed 2 seasons, but then he came back, right? In 2009 with the Eagles, only 86 passing yards, but then went to Philadelphia for the next 3 years, 3,018, 3,303, 2,362, then 1,215, then declined from there. I think a case can be made for him to be in the Hall of Fame, absolutely, but we all know the Hall of Fame writers and voters and those who judge everyone, all their moral compasses, right? So Vic definitely won't be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I do think he's a very compelling case. And had it not been for that, unfortunate situation that he placed himself in, I would think he'd be a definite Hall of Famer for sure.
I mean, thought of another way, could you imagine being in that moment watching Michael Vick lead the Falcons? I believe it was against the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau, watching him go in and lead that team to a victory and not think that he was going to make the Hall of Fame. I mean, he had so much forward momentum in terms of notoriety and just bringing the running quarterback into, it was an in vogue thing. I loved watching Mike Vick play. I just don't know that he can escape the baggage that he has.
I think the best argument I've heard for Mike Vick's candidacy, which I agree with you, I don't think is going to happen, is that he's your favorite player's favorite player. There's one X's and O's question I kind of just skipped over, and I shouldn't have because I think Zimmer mentioned him even in this presser. The linebackers, and in particular Kiko Alonso, who he has like a weird off-field history, if I recall correctly. But he was a guy that, from an on-field perspective, coming out of the draft at Oregon, he was a guy that I kind of liked as a coverage guy. But I feel like he's been up and down, because with the Eagles, I feel like he's had a good season and a bad season. With the Dolphins, I feel like he started out really rough. But what's the story with him? And then what's going on with the other linebackers? I know Stephon Anthony with the Saints had a really great rookie year and then just nothing. And then, I don't know. It just feels like there's a conversation to be had that we're not having.
Yeah, Kiko, I'm a big fan of Kiko Alonso. Not everybody is. Kiko came, you're right. He started with the Philadelphia Eagles, had a great season there, went to the Buffalo Bills, right, got traded from there, came to Miami, and had a real good first year, got signed to an extension, and had a really rough second year. And this year, I think he's having a very underrated season. What I'll say about Kiko is if you try to throw him in coverage, good luck, because he's probably going to fall down or slip or lose sight of the player, and the player is most likely going to get a reception. But his run game, his run defense, I think, is one of the best in the league. He throws his body out there with no care in the world. He is a competitor. He is a fiery competitor, and he's going to do whatever he can to take you down. What happened last year was this. Raekwon McMillan tore his ACL in the very first snap he played in his professional career in preseason. You had guys filling in at linebacker in different spots. He was out of position playing for the first year, out of position, thinking way too much. And what his downfall was, he was trying to make up for the mistakes that the other linebackers were making. So he wasn't staying true to his assignment. He was looking around, trying to do everything else and making sure everything else was covered. This year, he has Raekwon McMillan back in the middle. He has Jerome Baker, who has surprised the heck out of me. I was not high on the pick, but he has done a phenomenal job this season. He has more help. He has guys doing their job. Raekwon had his best season against New England, according to Pro Football Focus, and according to defensive coordinator Matt Burke as well. And sorry, not PFF. It was Matt Burke who said that. And Matt Burke said he actually didn't have any misreads or any screw-ups on his run fits. So Raekwon's improving. Kiko is just getting better and better. He's having a tremendous season. And I said Jerome Baker as well. He's having a great year. Very fast linebacker. And they've been using him to cover the scat backs out of the backfield and tight ends and blitzing from time to time. So the Dolphins linebacker core, it's not, one of the best in the league, but it is improving each and every week throughout the season.
And Kiko Alonso specifically is a lightning rod that really we're not talking about, but I've seen some things like, hey, let's vote Kiko into the Pro Bowl, and he kind of fits the bill statistically. But then you look at PFF and he's ranked 111th. So how do you make sense of those two diametrically opposed narratives there? So obviously it's somewhere in between. What I compare Kiko to, I compare him to a puppy, and he's excited. He likes to see things in front of him, and he is energetic, and he makes really good plays for this defense. But then when things are happening behind him, he gets a little distracted, and then things can get a little bit poor, especially in pass coverage. So when things are in front of him, I feel good. When things are behind him, I'm not feeling so good. And then, he's getting the lion's share of the snaps in the linebacker unit. So then you have the two Ohio State guys, Raekwon and Jerome. Jerome has been a really pleasant, addition for us, especially in run defense. I thought he was going to struggle there. I thought he was going to be strictly a niche linebacker, pass coverage kind of guy. And he's held up in run defense a lot better than expected. Raekwon has had, we talked about gap integrity earlier. One of the main culprits has been Raekwon so far. So he seems to have cleaned that up a little bit. So we just need to know if that is a sign of things to come or if that was just more inconsistent play.
All right. That's all pretty fascinating stuff. I guess you still obviously have some more questions you might want to ask me, but I do want to get one last thing out of the way. Is Xavier Howard good?
Yes.
No, he's elite.
So.
He's elite. He's elite.
He's elite. Okay.
Fair enough.
I compared him to. Oh, okay. That's interesting because, I think, so obviously the first couple of weeks, he was playing really well, and some people were like, he's the next new corner that, people need to talk about. It felt like he had fallen off in the conversation since there. From what I've watched, I've kind of compared him to D'Angelo Hall, where he's kind of a bit of a gambler, it seems like. But sometimes that gambling doesn't work out, and so I just kind of wanted to know. Well, that's all really good to hear. What do you have? What other burning questions do you have about the Vikings that maybe I could answer?
I've been wondering one all day today, and that is, I want to know the status of Fran Tarkenton, if he's going to play on Sunday or not.
Fran's out. Chris Carter. Chris Carter's had a great season, but he's out.
Cunningham there. Is he playing?
Oh yeah.
Randy Moss.
Well, the real question is, who's Culpepper playing for?
Yeah. Vikings want to have Dolphins the next.
I mean, this has been great. I kind of like the format between the two of us talking. So yeah, I think it'd be good to get maybe a score prediction out of the way. Obviously, everyone knows that they're meaningless. We're never right, but it's fun. So we might as well do it. How about you guys go first?
Yeah, I do have a lot of confidence in the Dolphins right now. I had tweeted out earlier in the week that momentum solves 80% of your problems, and it's true. You have momentum. You look at a train having momentum can crash through a brick wall. You train not having any momentum can't move anything, right? The Dolphins coming off that miracle in Miami, having tons of momentum going into this weekend. Obviously, the momentum only lasts so long, so it's going to last for the start of the game. The Dolphins can get off to a fast start. They can keep the momentum going. The Vikings can stop their momentum coming in. Then it's back to square one, and both teams are pretty evenly matched there. I am worried about your receiving core. I am worried about the big plays that Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen can create. Kirk Cousins, you never know when he's going to go off, and of course the uncertainty with your new offensive coordinator there. All that being said, I do think the Dolphins have a very good chance coming to this week, and I think they have all the confidence in the world right now. And I do think it's going to be a very close game, but I do think the Dolphins will be victorious in the end.
Well, that doesn't sound like a score. That just sounds like a...
All right. Let me give you a score.
Yeah.
24-17. That's my score.
All right.
I think we exasperated a lot in the Miami Miracle. God bless that game. I love it for the rest of my life. Yeah. I do think there will be some regression to the mean, especially on the road. I'm looking at a 27-20 victory for the Vikings.
As a former fan / reporter of a city alliterative miracle, I'll have to say the track record's not good. So I think that the Vikings have the ability to take advantage of the lost focus or whatever it is that drains teams after big come from behind victories. Actually, I think the spread is something like 7.5. I don't think the Vikings quite cover, but I think they get really close. 31-24, bad beat for somebody. I think the Vikings come away with the home field advantage. Plus, I think that the matchups all tend to favor the Vikings in marginal ways across the board. So, I'm picking the Vikings.
All right. We'll see how it plays out. They play the games for a reason, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, of course. If they played them all on paper, the Vikings would have beaten the Bills. So
yes, absolutely. The Vikings have a lot of potential threats there, and if Xavier Howard does not play, it increases their chances big time. Minka Fitzpatrick struggled against Josh Gordon. Josh Gordon didn't put up a big ton of stats, but he did get the chunk plays when it mattered the most. So, and then you always have the new offensive coordinator, new coach, whatever it might be. Players paying attention just a little bit more. I believe it's the Patrick Ewing effect, where players just really pick up everything around them a lot more. They pay attention more just because there's a new coach there or a player out or a new player, and everyone just steps up their game there. So I am worried about that.
All right. Thanks so much, man. This has been great.
All right, Arif. We appreciate your time, and, good luck on Sunday, but not too much luck.
Oh, yeah. Same to you. Same to you.
Arif the Chief, thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. Again, that's Matthew Kanata and Aaron Sutton over at Phinsider Radio. You can catch them at the Phinsider or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated if you want to hear more of what they have to say about the Miami Dolphins in preview of this matchup. Do you want to drop your Twitter handles? Any articles you want to plug?
Yeah, absolutely. You could check me out at Kanata NFL, CANNATA NFL, and then thephinsider.com.
And I am at Sutton Laces Out, and also a member of the Phinsider.com. And Arif, thank you for the chuckle. You know exactly where my handle's coming from, brother.
That's good.
Well, let's open the mailbag. And the first question is from LaRue, who asks, why is Arif previewing the Dolphins when his team plays the 49ers?
You shouldn't have even included this question in the mailbag.
Do you have anything to say about the Seahawks-49ers matchup? Which coach is going to end up getting snapped?
I didn't even know the Seahawks were playing the 49ers. I don't care about that team at all.
Well, which team is which like positions coach is going to end up getting snapped? That was an awesome video. Like it would seem like all of NFL Twitter bowed to Seahawks Twitter for about 20 minutes on Wednesday.
The Cable Thanos video?
Yes.
It was incredible. The Daft Punk was a really nice touch.
It really was. Also, if the Vikings miss out on the 6th seed, which team is most likely to replace us?
That's tough. I suppose I could just this is James before the show sometimes says, oh, hey, Arif, is there anything be worth researching before we get to the mailbag? And this time I said no. I just realized that this one's probably worth taking a quick look at, and I did not do that.
The sound of that you're hearing right now is the sound of Arif silently Googling while talking out loud to try to make it so this seems like a more transition, like a more seamless transition, because it's going to seem like by the end of the time he's talking.
I'm very open about when I'm Googling live on a podcast. Also, I was Googling live on this podcast trying to figure out who would it be if it wasn't the Vikings. So my initial thought was the Panthers, and they're at 14% right now. And so that makes sense. But Washington is at 15%. I think so. A lot of these simulators don't take into account that Washington has a black hole at quarterback. So I think that it is not actually 15% for Washington, in which case that increases the odds of it being the Eagles, of course, who are also 6 and 7 with Washington. But it really kind of depends on the schedule. And I'm guessing that the Panthers, who have probably a little bit more in terms of not talent, right? Because the Eagles have quite a bit, but I think just have more going for them. I think they've got a better shot.
Well, and now the Eagles have a bit of a black hole at quarterback as well, but other than the fact that Nick Foles is going to end up starting for them. But we will get to that in just a moment. I promise you we will have
Carson
an
Wentz
Arif
podcast.
Yeah, we will have an Arif take on the Carson Wentz situation. Brett asks, are the Dolphins a team we should expect to be able to run the ball against with some success?
Yeah. Well, so their defensive line, I think, is filled with. So aside from Cameron Wake, it's filled with a lot of players I think who should be playing better. Devon Godchaux's playing actually better than I thought he was. He was not a guy that I liked coming out of the draft. So I'll say that. But they got Robert Quinn for a reason and so on. But losing Ndamukong Suh has just been a significant problem. They anticipated it, but it seems like they're just allowing teams to get over them. The reason that they've allowed 1,900 yards, or I guess it's 1,800 yards this year, which I think leads the league. No, it's fourth in the league. Wow, Bengals allowed a lot of runs. Is in part because of the number of attempts, 379, but they've allowed 5 yards an attempt. What's interesting, though, is that, or 4.8. What's interesting is that when you take a look at expected points, it's closer to league average. So there might be some indication there that teams are running against them in favorable situations to run, and so it's not the yards they're giving up are not as bad, maybe as it seems in terms of game context. But based off of what I've seen. Teams are doing a lot, not just up the middle, but a little bit on the outside, too.
All right, next question is going to be from Tim Cummings, who asks, what's the probability of Stefanski staying on as offensive coordinator past this year? With the games remaining, how good does the offense have to look to cement his case? Also, if the Vikings put up 30-plus against the Dolphins and Lions, is that more of a bad defense or good offense?
It's setting us up for the hot takes, I think, the second question. I'll answer the second question first. I think that any offensive gains that'll be made over the next 2 weeks will be difficult to gauge because of precisely that, because the defenses they're going up against are not, aside from, players like Cameron Wake and Xavier Howard, are not like particularly impressive.
If you put up 30 against the Bears in Week 17, that might mean something if they're actually playing their starters.
Yeah, if they're playing their starters, yeah. And so, like, I think in terms of expected points, the Miami Dolphins are 28th defensively. Aside from the turnovers that they have the ability to generate, which they've been doing at a pretty decent clip, it's a lot like, having a bunch of D'Angelo Halls out there, right? Like, you're going to throw some picks, you're probably going to get some touchdowns in return. So it is difficult to kind of assess what the offense will look like. The Seahawks defense was playing, pretty well. I thought the offense defense matchup still, came out too much in the favor of the defense, from an expected standpoint in that game. So it's not as if, the offense, problems were solely a result of the quality of the Seahawks defense. But yeah, if they put up 30 points over the next 2 games, it's certainly worth having a conversation about, like, maybe what changed in the offense to do that and whatnot. But we should always keep in mind that these 2 defenses have been playing very poorly. I would hold off. So if the offense struggles, even against these 2 defenses, and then obviously against the third defense, I would still consider Stefanski as an offensive coordinator candidate because A, he's been kind of groomed for that, and that was the reason that they blocked him, and B, it is tough to take over an offense. There are a lot of teams that were interim offensive coordinators have taken over and they haven't done well, and sometimes they blame the new guy, and it's kind of not fair. He hasn't had time to install his offense. So I would say he should consistently remain in the running. If an interesting opportunity comes up again, maybe, but that would be kind of a slap in the face to him. And you don't want to, like, keep taking off your staff or anything like that. So I think it's very likely he'll remain the offensive coordinator, even if the offense struggles. And obviously, if the offense improves in a really significant way, even beyond kind of what, defensive struggles we see over the next 2 weeks, that, it'd be worth kind of commending him.
I had a terrible dream the other night, an absolutely terrible dream. Stefanski was taken for a head coach or like an offensive coordinator position somewhere, and the Vikings brought in Mike McCarthy.
Oh, God.
There's your nightmare scenario.
Jesus.
Yeah, I'm not eating spicy food before dinner again, or before bed again. That was bad. Logan asks, is the offensive line coach by committee possibly to blame for the O-line problems? Obviously, losing Sperano was bad, but I imagine that not having one specific replacement could aggravate the issue.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Based off the interactions I saw in camp, it felt more like to me that Clancy Brown was in charge, but between the 2 of them. But I think it's had a significant impact because, the offensive line is playing below their talent level. Players that you expect to play better, like Pat Elflein, for example, are not playing well, right? So, I don't know. I would say it's probably a pretty high impact, but in terms of whether or not specifically it's like having 2 coaches versus 1, I don't think that's as necessarily as big, just because I think the dynamic between the 2, there's still some deference to Barone. So I think that's like a valid concern, but they're not coming at it from different places. Barone is teaching Sperano's technique. I think it's probably fine.
Next question. Mo Sav asks, why do a vast majority of Vikings close losses end in strip sacks? It's like every 2-minute drill that has promise has been stopped by that play.
I mean, Cousins, has the most fumbles in the NFL since 2015. I mean, it's because he fumbles. And also because they're giving up pressure and creating opportunities to fumble. And, why does it happen at the end of games instead of the beginning of games? Because screw you, your fans. You should be hurt.
There we go. It's a bit like when Dante Culpepper was the quarterback, and you would see him you knew that a game-ending interception was going to happen. You knew it. You felt it in your bones. He'd drop back. The Vikings were down somewhere between 3 and 7, and he'd wind it up and he'd let it go. And the moment it left his hands, nope, that's getting caught by somebody other than a purple jersey.
Right.
You just know these things.
Yeah. If there were like a mechanistic reason that's independent of like just Vikings luck. It might just be because, defensive linemen are playing kind of their own games, right? That they're setting up offensive linemen throughout the game and, saving kind of their best moves for most critical periods, third downs, late in games, stuff like that. So, that could be a mechanistic reason, but the real reason is because you cheer for the Vikings.
Probably. Kirk Cousins' hands just get unreasonably sweaty in the last 2 minutes of games.
Right, yeah, he's got a. There's been a lot of ads for people, or for a lotion for people with particularly sweaty hands. Maybe he's got to invest in those.
Just have a big thing of that in the van. Next question. Kenneth Allen asks, do you think Thielen has done enough to nab a second-string All-Pro this year, or was the drop-off from the first 8 games too much?
I think you'll get it, because I think he's still like on a leaderboard, right? Like I think he's still killing it in terms of like total receiving yards and stuff like that. So he leads the league in receptions. He's third in the league in total in receiving yards. People vote for the Pro Bowl fairly early, which I think. Well, I mean, I'd say the same thing every year, and I'm not unique in my thoughts on this, but like it would be cool if Pro Bowl voting started like week 14 and ended like in week 1 of the playoffs. Like it's dumb that it ends before week 16. But people vote for the Pro Bowl early. People know his story again and again and again. He leads the league in receptions. He's third in the league in receiving yards. I think he's going to make the second string All-Pro. But, I mean, the drop-off has been dramatic. Like, I think a deep dive into Thielen stats by, like, a national writer or a casual fan trying to figure out their Pro Bowl vote, or like, Associated Press guy trying to figure out his All-Pro vote, that would be interesting if they did that, because the drop-off might be meaningful to them. But I think more likely than not, Adam Thielen makes it.
Next question is also from Kenneth Allen. What is Arif's take on Frank Gore's Hall of Fame case? I'm a staunch believer in him not being worthy. Now, I mentioned this as a question pre-show, and I was shocked. Shocked, I say.
Yeah, I didn't know that James didn't know. So I was really, because James was like, why would this question even come up? And I was like, James, check out the rushing leaderboard and where Frank Gore ranks.
He's number 4.
He's number 4. He's right behind Barry Sanders.
He's got 14,734 yards. When you're in the league since the 70s, this will happen. Like,
right. He's ahead of Curtis Martin. He's ahead of LT. He's ahead of Dickerson and Peterson, Jim Brown, Marshall Faulk. Come on, man.
Like, I am just gobsmacked looking at the leaderboard. But I was more gobsmacked when you told me to look up on Pro Football Reference what his nickname was.
This is so good.
How have I gone my adult life without knowing that Frank Gore's nickname is the Inconvenient Truth? That is that's a Hall of Fame worthy nickname.
Right? It's like so the answer is Frank Gore deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Not for what he's done on the field, though. For the mere existence of his nickname. I
want to see that on the bust in Canton. Like, you and I end up going to the Hall of Fame game one year for some reason because we're idiots and we just happen to have, like, Patreon money to do it. So we go to Canton and we go and see the bus and we see Frank Gore, Frank the Inconvenient Truth Gore. I want that nickname to ring out for centuries.
What's great also about Frank Gore is that he's old enough to have invented the internet. So there's like a couple of directions he could take this. But yeah, so interestingly, I remember it must have been 06 because he was like intersecting with Alex Smith in San Francisco. That people were talking about Frank Gore's underrated, and that made a lot of sense then. He had like 1,600, 1,700 rushing yards that year, 8 touchdowns, over 5 yards a carry. Made a Pro Bowl that year. And so, that was a year that Adrian Peterson wasn't, I don't think he was in the league, right? He was 2007. And so there's like this gap, I think, in terms of, Marshawn Lynch wasn't in the league. So there's this gap in terms of like who the best running backs in the NFL were. Frank Gore never kind of repeated that, right? He never, got over 1,250 yards in a year. He never beat 5 yards a carry again. The highest he got was 4.9, which is pretty close, and then 4.7, and then it's a bunch of 4.1s and 2s. In terms of expected points created from rushing, not a ton. He's kind of an average receiving back, 400, 300 yards on a lot of years. He's just been consistent and reliable, and I think everyone kind of just understands that for a long time, and he ends up kind of fourth in the leaderboard. I'm not a huge fan of volume statistics. I don't think Jerome Bettis should have been in the Hall of Fame. I do think that Terrell Davis should be in the Hall of Fame or is in the Hall of Fame, so he deserves it. And so I tend to preference peaks over longevity. And to me, I think at some point you have to be for a sustained, but even if it's a small but sustained period of time, one of the 2 or 3 best players at your position, unless it's like a scenario like Phillip Rivers, Tony Romo, who are like constantly behind Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, and to some extent like Ben Roethlisberger and Drew Brees. So like that's maybe an exception that I would make. But I think for the most part, if you're not consistently one of the 2 or 3 best at your position, you can't be a Hall of Famer. And Frank Gore is a quintessential Hall of Very Gooder.
And it's funny, just looking at the list of rushing leaders and the players that are currently in the league.
It's all Hall of Famers.
Of all the top 25, yeah, it's like all Hall of Famers and Frank Gore and Adrian Peterson. And I am of the belief that AP should go into the Hall of Fame despite being a terrible human being, or at least a terrible father. Yeah, it was like Frank Gore. This might be the like quietest Hall of Fame like campaign that you are likely to see in the NFL. Because he's nothing really flashy. He's just been that consistent, and 14,734 yards is nothing to cough at, like nothing to sneeze at. That's impressive. He's right behind Barry Sanders. He's like 500 yards like 500 yards away.
Yeah, it's wild, right? That like and everyone knows that Barry Sanders retired early, but also Barry Sanders is so effective that he's 3rd in total rushing yards. It's wild to think that he could surpass Barry Sanders if he plays another year, which I mean he might as well. I mean because he's not breaking down. Apparently, he's not getting any worse. So
he's a month older than I am, and I'm just astonished that he's still in the league. Like I am just astonished that he's doing as well as he is, or the fact that he has accomplished as much as he has. That's there's a lot of years of bad NFC West in there, though. Like not that it's a bit like looking at the whole 49ers and their rise to the top in the 80s and seeing all those plays against the Falcons. Like, there's a lot of bad NFC West in there, but he was able to do it, so good on him.
They couldn't beat the 7-9 Seahawks for that playoff spot, though. So.
Nope, they certainly could not. Hey, let's talk about something upbeat for just a moment. Let's go into our Carson Wentz section of the mailbag. We have 2 questions.
That's cruel, man.
Well,
he's injured.
I just assume that.
Respect.
Oh yeah, I assume that you've been doing all of that on Twitter. Kenneth Allen and Don from Ohio are asking, how does Arif feel now that his hate has successfully broken Carson Wentz's back? And Don asked, why did Arif go full Tanya Harding on Carson Wentz?
Okay, so I have done nothing to Carson physically.
You like to stay. You'd like to not be in the same state as him if possible.
Yeah, we moved for a reason. But it's some upstart high schooler or whatever. We got to get out of here. So there's actually an interesting thing about this that has nothing to do with me. That sounded so weird.
No, that's the best thing you've said on the show in years. I can't
believe that. I gotta not say sentences like that. Despite the fact that it has nothing to do with me, there's something you may find interesting. It's just awful. No, the interesting thing is that the Eagles medical staff might be under some fire. So Manuel Acha, who knows somebody who played for the Eagles, and he also played for the Eagles, I think. Mentioned that there are some criticisms of the Eagles medical staff that they would often tell players one thing when the reality was another to force the players or encourage, not force, but like using misleading information, encourage the players to play when it was not in their best interest to do so, because the medical staff works for the team, not the player. And that this was inevitable. So it's a new medical staff this year, I guess. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one comparison to Manuel Acho's medical staff, but, the same people hired them and they still work for the team. And so he was saying that could be the case. And that seems to be potentially the case with Wentz. There's an unsubstantiated rumor from a person who's apparently unreliable, so I'm not going to repeat that rumor here. But Carson Wentz is seeking a second opinion about his back, and I guess there's like a fracture or something like that, and he didn't necessarily know about that beforehand. And it seems like it's being kind of egregiously mishandled from an organization that a lot of people saw as like, kind of a model organization for how you run things, despite like kind of the weirdness surrounding the Chip Kelly era. So, that is actually like a fascinating story. And it's not, just that I hate NDSU alums, which, I do. Which I think Billy Turner is no longer with the Dolphins. So I don't think there are any NDSU alums on the Dolphins.
And I suppose you're going to be cheering on South Dakota State this weekend.
Yeah, my Jackrabbits.
No
lifelong fan. Go Fighting Jake Weinekes.
There we go. You got to stay on brand. I believe it's the Don from Ohio has asked, rumor has it John DeFilippo wanted to start Sloter over Cousins and was fired for it. If true, why was he not promoted to head coach /GM? You have to believe some stuff from Don from Ohio now, because he was the first to report that DeFilippo had been fired. So
yeah. According to my hopes and dreams.
According to my incredibly unreliable sources, I believe was the line. Also, dear cheaters, when y'all win the Norse Code Fantasy Football League this weekend, it's actually next weekend, does Dusty get part of the victory as well, or will you shun him like your pride and decency? I'm not shunning my pride.
When we win, that is a victory for Norse Code.
Exactly.
So
this is the purest form of like, no, this is this is like the 3-person tag team in wrestling. Like, no, we're operating under Freebird rules here. Like this counts. This works for us. I did actually text Dusty that
we're about to win.
Well, I texted Dusty that I was going to attempt to defend his our.
I'm going into the semis defending our pride as champion.
Exactly. Defending the Norse Code championship. And I got a selfie with the strangest look. So I'd put it in the show notes, but it's too weird for it almost looked like the Ark of the Covenant had been opened. And like that was That's what you saw inside. So Dusty will take part in the victory if and when that ends up happening. Whatever. I had a great game last week, which means this week's going to be terrible. So we'll see. Or my opponent's going to miss like 3 field goals and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Or extra points. We'll see.
Negative 75 points.
That would be.
So we started this league a year before they changed the extra point rule. And
yep.
I asked James, like, so are we going to change this rule? And he was like, absolutely not.
No. Like all of a sudden it became possible that more misses were going to happen. Like, nope. Now we're just more relevant. Now we're just ahead of the curve. Norse Code is ahead of the curve.
Right. And it changed the draft strategy. Like Justin Tucker got drafted in like the 5th round.
It's glorious. All right, that is going to be it for this episode. Arif, what do you have to plug?
I just got a piece up at The Athletic about how Stefanski might change the approach to the offense and what that'll look like. Obviously, talk a lot about like play action, stuff like that. And then hopefully I'll have a piece up also that previews the Dolphins game.
Excellent.
Probably stealing some stuff from the interview you just heard with Kanata.
Excellent. Well, that'll be it for this episode. We will see you next week when we talk about our hopefully our victory over the Dolphins. So, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember to tweet that, even if it is a work in progress. And we will talk to you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at norsecodepodcast. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/norsecode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/norsecode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.